Hi everyone, my name is Paul Matthews and today I'm going to be taking you through the new functionality of Greentree Windows Designer. Okay, so the Windows Designer is available in the 2017.2.0 release, which is coming out in mid-December 2017. Some points to note on this designer. Replaces the Screen Customization Manager. So Screen Customization Manager goes to be replaced with what is now called the Windows Designer. It's free. It's free for all customers, regardless of whether you had Screen Customization Manager or not. But you need to upgrade. So you need to be at the 2017.2.0 release. The Browser Designer is not free, so you still need to pay for that. There's still a chargeable module for customers. Okay, so as I move into the demo, it's kind of made up of two parts. There's the assignment of screens and the actual design of the screens. Because of all the changes that were made around the assignment as well as the design, it's worth breaking them out into two separate sections to go through. Okay, so the first bit is about assignment, but a little bit of background before we get into the detail. On the company maintenance now, you will see that the designer, both the browser designer and the Windows designer, have their own suite in the company maintenance. So you'll see that in there. When you come into the user preferences, you'll notice that the Screen Forms tab is now gone. It's because the assignment works a different way. You'll also notice, for those of you that may have become a bit frustrated by it, that this user preferences also opens a lot quicker. That's because it's not reloading that Screen Forms every time. So it opens quicker. In the Menu Security tab, you'll notice down here there's an option under Designer called Editor is Permitted. So we've made the distinction between the assignment and the actual creation of the forms. So the actual designing of the forms is this editor function. So that means in reality, you'll probably only have about one or two people who will actually be designing the forms, probably even one in most instances. But the actual assignment may be handled by a different person or a couple of people. So if this box is set to false, it means I cannot get into the designer to create versions of the form, which you'll see in a few seconds. Under here, that person will still see, sits in the same place under this customization. It's now called Designer. The person can still get into that screen, but that really is only limiting them to the assignment of forms. You'll see what I mean by that in a minute. There's another option called Designer, which is just not available if that editor is not ticked. Okay, so a couple of ways to get into the new designer. First one, which we've touched on, is to come into customization and into the designer. Another way is from an actual screen itself. So a fairly simplistic example, I'm in the customer. Up here, I right click in this icon space in this toolbar at the top and click on the designer. The difference being a bit like those shortcuts, it knows what form I want to do. If I come into the designer from scratch or from the menu, sorry to jump around the screens here, it just brings me into that screen. Okay, around the assignment. If I'm looking for a form, so this is a search bar. As you can probably tell, but I'll state the obvious, this is not an enterprise search. So this is looking, if I'm going to look again for the customer, but it is doing a search on the name or the description. You'll see I've written customer. It's looking for the customer there in that part of it. Where it's bold and the plus sign indicates that there are some customized screens there already. If I just plus on those, they're highlighted in yellow. And there's one with the sales order entry as well. So this customer is actually looking for several things. It's looking on the name of the form, it's looking on the customization name, it's looking on the company, and it's looking on the author, and we'll see this bit over here. If I then click on this here, you'll also notice on here that if I'm on the base form, I can't get into the designer element. So again, I can't make changes to the standard form. The minute I click on an existing form that I've created here, I can get into the designer. We'll get into the designer itself shortly, just to highlight the main differences on this setup or this allocation of these forms. You'll notice two new icons at the top here. These are import and export forms. So again, we've added the functionality where you may do a lot of work in a test system because you don't want to interrupt anything on live. You can then export the form, a bit like you do with A&A rules, workflow desks. It also gives the ability to share forms with other partners. Going forward, we'd like to be able to kind of share some forms that we do with people to everybody else, so we can use those import and export options. So coming across here on the right hand side, you'll see my screen is active. I've given it a name. You can call it any name you want. It would be good if some kind of rules were put in place. For example, you might put your partner name or your partner initials at the front of it, so it's obvious who's done it and what the name is, but those rules are up to you. The author is defaulted in for who's logged in, but you'll notice that that can be changed as well, and the company that it's assigned to. But what we've done over here is you've got these, and it's telling us the class that it's sitting in. It also says what the menu paths are. So in other words, this customer screen is accessed in these two places. Now again, overriding Greentree security is on this. So if I didn't have access to these two screens, they wouldn't both be there. I might just be only looking at the inquiry. Therefore, that's the only one that would be there. What companies are applicable? So on the face of it here, this screen, because I'm sitting on this revamped customer maintenance screen, this screen sits in only these companies. What teams is it in? What users is it in? So we've tipped the assignment up the other way. So down here, it's saying what's available, and I've got a default. So is this going to become, in this example, my customer maintenance form, is it now going to become the default? And as you can see here, I can do it across companies, across users and teams, I'll come on to those just in a moment, without having to do what happened to do before, where you need to log on to each company individually and assign it. So hopefully that's taken that pain away. Teams. I don't have many teams in my demo system here, but if there were teams, I could assign it to the teams, or I can go down to a user level. So here's my users, and I've assigned it to, where are we? Amanda and Angela, as I can see here. So at a glance, I can see those users that it applies to. Okay, a couple of other things while I'm just on this. You cannot amend the module controls. Module controls are not there. This one is just some EDI, but you can't amend this. So there's no module controls that can be set. Taking that bit out of it. Okay, on the assignments tab, so you'll notice while that was looking at a glance here, on the assignments. So what you'll notice is on this assignments tab, we've got team or user. So take the example I looked at before. I'm looking at Amanda Elgar. So again, this gives me another view. So I'm looking at Amanda, I'm saying these are the companies that Amanda has access to. These are the suites that Amanda has access to. And these are the team or teams that she is in. I can then limit it. This is giving me everything. So a little bit cumbersome to read from that basis. Again, I'll narrow it down to that customer. I can come down to the screen. So this tells me a couple of things. Got access to the USA, the NZ, and the UK. These are not here. Amanda does not have access to AR in these two companies. Again, I can start to limit down even further. So if I come down to New Zealand, and what you'll notice here is that these columns change again. So this gives me another view of the data. So down where I've chosen the user and the company and the actual form itself, it's saying I've got access to that, but what's the source? And the source is that this is assigned at a user level to Amanda. If it was a team, it might say team admin, if it was assigned at a team level. So this will let us, well, this will let you, in effect, or even the customers, see what screens people have got and at what level they've got them assigned. So whether it's at a company level, a team level, or an individual user level. This is also treated as a clever table. So you could extract all that just into a spreadsheet to work at it. But you need to have that company in to get that source there. Otherwise, you're just going to get the company information across that way. Okay, so that covers what I wanted to cover on the assignment. Please bear in mind that's how those are done. You search for the form, you can assign it there. Just to recap, assign them there at a company level, make them the default. Again, what you can do on these as well, if you've got lots of different forms, lots of companies, I can right click and I can select all. So if I wanted to make it the default across a whole range of companies, I've got that. I don't have to tick them individually. I've got a description here. I can put in some user text if I want to. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the actual designing of the forms. So where we are on this customer maintenance, I'm going to use this customer maintenance form that was designed earlier. So the designer is highlighted there. So I go into the designer screen. Now, one of the first things you might notice is it has a bit of a look and feel of the browser designer. So if you haven't used that browser designer, you won't know what I'm talking about, but some of the controls are aligned with how the browser designer works. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got what we're calling the split button at the top here. You notice that when the screen opens, it's called Windows Designer at the top. So that's the definition of, or the clear indicator that's showing us we're in the Windows Designer screen. On the split button, one of the things it's good to get into the habit of doing, I'll go through these controls one by one in a second, is this keep on top. That lets this palette here sit on top of my whole screen as I'm designing it. So I'm going to switch that on to keep on top. That means no matter what I do, I move this over, this is always going to sit on top here. Okay. What do I want to do here? So first of all, in here, I might want to look at what I'm doing with some of these controls. I click on the code. Now, the minute I click on this code here, it highlights this field. So it's telling me this is the field you're looking at. I click on the web down here. This box changes. This is the web that I'm looking at, this field. So again, this is one of the big changes from the screen customization manager, where you had to find your way around. This time it's driven from the actual screen itself. So I click on the code. What you'll notice here is that these are in bold. This shows that these have been changed already. I click on that, I can remove the customization. What you'll see here is this almost like a header function, so the label is code. Here's the label, and the tab order is changed as well. On this, I can either just undo that one, and you'll notice it's gone next to bold. Or if I remove the whole lot, they're taken all off. So I can do the whole lot, or I can do each one. If I apply it at what I'm calling this header level, it will undo all of them. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to close that down because I don't want those changes. Come back in. Click on the code. I can undo those. The other things I've got here. I've got reveal hidden controls. Because obviously one of the things we did when we were setting up, we thought this is great, we can hide things, but how do we find them again if we don't know where they are? If I reveal them, you'll notice that I hid all this section here. That's revealing them for me. The other thing I can do, I can just take that off again. I can list the hidden controls. Because what you'll see in a second is that I can move fields around. So if I list them, just need to move that over. This is listing what these are because I might have moved them to somewhere and I don't know where they are. So therefore I want to make sure what that list is. We'll be able to find those things. So those are my hidden controls. I can list them in a tab order. Starts to get a bit more tricky here, but this is listing, and what you'll notice is lists everything. Yeah, this is listing everything and the tab order. We're starting to get into quite a bit of detail here about how you might move around, which is fine. The thing is to note here is that you don't amend these index lines here. If I want to change the tab order, I need to do it in this bit here. So I'll just come out of that. This is where I change the tab order. I want this now to be 45. But why that tab order is good is that it tells me what the order of sequence is, so I can work out what my tab order might be. You'll notice now that I've changed that tab order and that I've got two things that have suddenly, I've got this one here that's appeared, undo. So I've got an undo function. Now the undo function works the same as it does with what we're used to using it with, Excel and Word. I can use the Control Z, but also it'll undo all the steps until the last save. As soon as and I've got a redo function as well. And again, I've got that Control Z and Control Y, just like what Windows does. Okay. The other thing I can do is these buttons on the right-hand side. Oops, apologies. If I want to change that button, I've lost my designer. If I want to change that button, I can hide that button. So that button can be gone. Again, I've got these bolds that I can release it. The other thing is I can relabel it. If I don't like what it's called, I can relabel it. Also what I can do, you'll notice the ampersand in there is how that's the shortcut key to the H. I can change that. So if I wanted to change that and make the ampersand the R, you'll notice there that the R. So I can change those shortcuts as well as changing the description, as well as hiding the whole button. Now what we have found when we've been designing the functionality around hiding the buttons and moving them, we found that there's some issues with some screens, and that because the way some of the forms build is that when the form is accessed, then it builds what buttons are there. So you may come across issues that where you move buttons in a certain order, they may reappear or overlap on other ones. If you do encounter that, please just raise a support call and let us know. We have looked to resolve those on on the screens or the forms that are more readily used, service requests, but there may be some other forms. So just be aware of that. There's a known issue, but just be aware of it. Okay, the other thing we can do is we can move, and as you'll see with this one as well, we can move sections around. And what's happened, if I just go into, I can move fields. So I might want to move this balance type. You'll notice there's a snap plot grid that appears. So this is helping us to line it up. In this instance, I just want to put the balance type there. So what the system then does, it says, would you like to move the label for it as well? So it's clever enough to say, well, I'm moving this field, there's a label. The downside of this is, if you've already changed your form quite a bit, it may not pick up the correct label because it's looking for the label that's almost the nearest to it. So in this instance, yes. But also I can move, I might want this balance type for what I'm doing. I might want to put it onto, I've moved it up into here. I know, a bizarre place to put it, but I'm going to put it there. So I can move fields onto other tabs. I can also move whole sections if I want to as well. Again, you'll notice what's happening here is when I come up to a certain stage, the orange outline represents some overlapping. So it's trying to assist me at a visual level to say, you can't do this because you're going to have overlapping fields. So I'm going to put it back in, or at least try to. Okay, so the standard applies in terms of, I can snap lock, see if I want to move that, it's giving me a grid that tells me how I'm moving it. So I'm doing the usual things, names, colors, making fields mandatory, making things read-only, what existed before. But I'm able to now move those to other tabs, move fields to other tabs. At this moment in time, you cannot create new tabs like you can with the browser. The other thing you can't do at the moment, but we are currently working on, we're hoping to have it done very shortly, and this is the one that is the most requested, but it's also one of the more difficult, and that's the ability to move UDFs and or trees onto the main tab, or individually, because obviously people are setting certain fields that they wanted captured up front, and to cut down on the amount of data that might be on a screen that the people might be able to put in. That's being worked on. Hopefully that'll become available shortly. It is a bit more difficult, as I hope you appreciate. Another thing I'd like to show you. What I'm going to do is just look at so just on the service request, into the designer, again, come into here. I want this to keep on top. So in the service request, this is another good example of some work that was a little bit more complex to do and you need to be aware of. So in the service request is a good example of these free text fields where we've got, in this instance, contact notes, problem description, solution, and people use these in various ways. But if I click, for example, in this problem description, you'll notice another option that comes up down here is this parent aspect. Now what we found again with the testing and the work that some of the partners did in the EAP program on this is we found that as you maximize screens and then resize them, is that these mostly free text fields weren't resizing themselves properly. So what we did was make available, and you'll see in this palette, is this concept here called parent aspect. So you'll go across, stretch it, down, none. So what that means is when the screen is resized, it'll stretch to fill the screen, but it won't go down to fill the screen. It'll resize itself back up. So that just be careful on how these are done and what fields and where you're placing them. So obviously, well, not obviously, I shouldn't say that. So across, you've got none. So you might want to, if you've designed your screen a certain way and you want it to fill out a certain area, you may not stretch it. I may reduce this problem description field, and therefore I might not want to stretch it. I can anchor it right, I can center it, or I can stretch it. So that's the across. Then on the down, just be careful what you do here. Anchor bottom, center, or stretch it. So if you're anchoring it at the bottom, it's going to always end it down the bottom of the screen. So therefore you may end up having a rather confusing looking screen because it'll stretch and overlap what's already potentially there. You will not always see this parent aspect appear in the palette. Depends what screen you're on. It depends what the fields are. Generally, it's on those free text fields. So please be aware of that. Okay, just to cover off the last few things that I haven't covered yet on the split pay here. So if I just do this very simply and say hide that one, and yes, I'll do that as well, and hide that one, yes please, and that one, and that one, and let's make this one make the text red. There we go. So as we said, I can undo all of those step by step. The other thing I can do is I can view this. Yep. So if I view it, yes, I do want to save those changes. There's my view. So there's my fields up there have gone. There's my red. Just bring that back. And you'll see I'm in the Windows Designer. So here's my view. So almost the equivalent of your load desk that you're doing in Workflow Designer. This is what my screen is looking like. I know, pretty simplistic. Here's my bold, which lets me undo bits. Click on that, I can remove the customization if I want to, because my undo is no longer there. Okay, so just to run through these briefly, as I haven't covered them off as I've gone through. So the access we've talked about, whether we're hiding things, and then we can reveal them or list them. My values, again, a bit similar to Screen Customization Manager. And what am I doing with those fields? Am I making them mandatory, making them persistent? Am I forcing capitals? The font, so I can change my font here if I want to as well. I might want to bold that. My background, so that's for that field, remember, yeah? Unlikely to make it that, but if I made it that. My parent form, so what's it hanging off, if you like. So again, this is showing where that is. This, as you saw earlier, I was moving fields and sections around and placing them on other tabs. This has the same effect, except it's doing it on the palette. Yeah. So once I've moved something, if I move my organization, this will then change accordingly, and this will become bold. So this is doing the same thing. It's just showing then where it is and the position that it's sitting in. Parent aspect we've talked about, and also my tab order. We've talked about that as well. Talked about the saving it, the view, the cancel, the find, so I can find certain fields if I want to, and the other controls that under there. Always keep on top when you first come into this screen. Okay, that covers it for Windows Designer. I do have a brief recap I just want to go through and highlight the main points. So, as stated earlier, Windows Designer is available at 2017.2.0, available for all customers. The assignment and the design are separated out. So you can assign, a different person can assign them that has to design them. So taking away that people doing too much or doing something they shouldn't. The assignment is done within that designer setup now. It's not done as part of the file preferences, making it a lot easier to assign en masse, view who's got what, view hasn't got what, who hasn't got what, and change it around, either at a company level, team level, or an individual user level. Much easier. Lots more options with the designer. I can move fields to other tabs, can hide things a lot more easier. I can see what's being hidden. I can start to work with those buttons on the right hand side, relabel them, hide them, give myself less to work with on the screen or more on a screen if needed. There'll be release notes to go along with this. They'll be found on campus. Please add further enhancements to the ideas portal. We're on a quite strict timeline with this, and with the EAP process that we ran, which was really well received by the people who were involved, who realized that there were still some more things that and suggestions they came up with, the main ones being the trees and the UDFs being able to be moved. That will appear on the ideas portal because that's the next task we were aiming to achieve on the list. But anything more that you said, please, that you would see would enhance the product even more, please add it to the ideas portal. Any questions on anything you've seen? Just feel free to drop me an email. And thanks very much for your time. Hope this has been useful. Thank you.